comes from Matthew 25. We started with the first parable from Matthew 25, the parable of the bridesmaids and the lamps and the oil. That was last week. This week is the parable of the talents or the coins. And next week is the parable of the sheep and the goats. Jesus, again, is in Jerusalem, and this is at the end of his ministry, and he's kind of thinking about end times in a way. And so these parables, one thing they serve as are kind of instructions for what the disciples should do and who they should be when Jesus is gone. So let's listen now for the word of God for us, for our community today. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who was leaving on a trip. He called his servants and handed his possessions over to them. To one, he gave 5 valuable coins, and to another, he gave 2, and to another, he gave 1. He gave to each servant according to that servant's ability. Then he left on his journey. After the man left, the servant who had 5 valuable coins took them and went to work doing business with them. He gained 5 more. In the same way, the one who had 2 valuable coins gained 2 more. But the servant who had received the 1 valuable coin dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of these servants returned and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 valuable coins came forward with 5 additional coins. He said, "Master, you gave me 5 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 5 more." His master replied, "Excellent. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come and celebrate with me." The second servant also came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 2 more." His master replied, "Well done. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come and celebrate with me." Now the one who had received 1 valuable coin came and said, "Master, I knew that you are a hard man. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. So I was afraid, and I hid my valuable coin in the ground. Here, you have what's yours." His master replied, "You evil and lazy servant, you knew that I harvest grain where I haven't sown and that I gather crops where I haven't spread seed. In that case, you should have turned my money over to the bankers so that when I returned, you could give me what belonged to me with interest. Therefore, take from him the valuable coin and give it to the one who has 10 coins. Those who have much will receive more, and they will have more than they need. But as for those who don't have much, even the little bit they have will be taken away. Now take the worthless servant and throw him out into the farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is a difficult parable and one that invites struggle, I I think. There is the traditional interpretation. If you've heard it before, you may have heard a sermon that kind of sounded like this was an easy stewardship parable or an easy generosity parable. It slides really easy into some of our American values about making money and investing and saving. In this interpretation, it is so good that they have made a return on their money, and it can kind of read like the gospel according to Gordon Gekko or your other favorite investment banker or hedge fund manager. We can make it, and many have, simply about our money and being wise and so on and so forth. But Jesus, throughout the Gospels, we know that he is not concerned very often or at all with wealth accumulation or with economic growth. Those are concerns from our culture. Jesus, I don't think, is saying you should make all the money that you can because that is the good and faithful thing to do. And Jesus isn't simply just saying, give your money to the church so that it will be used well, although that may also be a good and faithful thing to do, but it's not so simple. There is another interpretation, and that interpretation is that that third servant, the one who hid his money, is in fact the hero. What if he was telling the truth about the master? What if he knew who the master really was, that the master earned his money through unfair economic practices? And so this servant decided no more and opted out of the system. And at its very basic level too, I feel for that servant because he didn't lose the money. What did he do that was so wrong that warranted the outer darkness and the weeping and the gnashing of teeth? The question, I think, for this parable, the question that I have been wrestling with is, who is the master? And can this master be trusted? If the master is in fact good, then this servant is needlessly frightened and anxious. But if the servant is telling the truth, then the servant did a really good thing. And maybe he is the one that we should follow more closely. Well, I don't know the answer to that question about this parable. It doesn't quite leave us with a very certain interpretation. Parables are like presents meant to be unwrapped, or like an onion with layers. You can even say they're like a kaleidoscope meant to turn and to be seen from different angles. So this parable makes me think about our economic practices, but it also makes me think, who is the master? Who is the master that we follow, that we serve? Because friends, how we view God changes how we respond in the world. If God is good and truly gracious and we can trust that grace, we will live graciously. But if God is a terrifying judge or an angry father, then we will live in fear and extend some of that judgment to others without even meaning to. So again, I don't know about this master in this parable, but I do know the God that we serve, the living God. And even though I myself struggle sometimes with old things I have been taught about how angry God is and how much God hates our sin, and that is true, I also know that God's grace is bigger than all of that. How then are we to live? Look again at this painting of the scene. I think there's a whole series of these, and I think they're just amazing because a living community of Christians in Cameroon read the stories, posed for them, pictures were taken, and then from the pictures, the paintings were made. So whenever you see the Jesus Mafa series, it comes from that collection of paintings. But here you can see, I think, kind of what it means to live according to how we see the person that we are serving. So on the left, I think those are the two servants who trusted that the gift that had been given them was good. And then on the right, you see the third servant who his arms are crossed. He looks, I don't know, disdainful, anxious, mad, all of those feelings combined, suspicious even. He is not certain at all. And so he opts out, as we hear in the parable. He doesn't participate in the gift that is given to him. And I don't know whether we are to judge that good or bad, as I said, but I know that we have been given a huge gift. In other translations, the gift that was given to the servants, the money, is called a talent. And it's not what we think of as talents or our skills or abilities, but a huge sum of money. Each of these men had been given years and years and years and years of money. In our terms, some of them, the first one would have had $5 million, and the second one, something like $2 or $3 million, and the third one, $1 million. What an amazing gift. And if we think about it as a life's work of wages, he has given them life and livelihood. But again, I don't want to make it all about money. It's not about the money, but that played in my imagination, the talent being their livelihood. And then thinking God's great gift to all of us is our very lives. And we can live boldly and take risks with our faith, with the good news that we haven't been entrusted with, or we can hide away, digging away the good news, digging away and hiding our hearts. In my own life, I have been prone to fear. Especially the worst one is fear of heights. I had a dream just the other day about something at a great height, although I can't remember, but yes, this plagues me all the time. And I was a Girl Scout all throughout my childhood, and we often did sort of adventure activities. And I remember one of them, was a high ropes adventure course. There was a zip line at the end. A zip line is, you stand on a platform and there's you get clipped into a rope or cable really. And, you fly down. It's supposed to be really exhilarating and fun. I was so scared. I was standing on the platform, pacing back and forth for a long time. And I finally went, but I was so scared that I held on to my cable connection so tightly that I was sore by the time that I got to the bottom. Okay, things like that are scary, and yeah, it can be humorous, but I can also tell you that the scariest things in my life have been being myself and connecting with other people in relationship, saying the thing that is hard to say to others, standing up for what's right. Those have required far more courage than stepping off that zip line platform. One of my mentors, in fact, recently sent me this card: start being brave about everything. It's a quote from Catherine of Siena. On the inside, she wrote, "You can. Be brave about everything." Sociologist and researcher and author Brené Brown, who's done a lot of work on vulnerability, she's a new podcast out about daring leadership, which comes from one of her books on daring leadership. And she says that we often think that courage and fear are opposites, that if we are filled with courage, we will not be afraid. But she says that's not the case. Actually, if we weren't afraid, we wouldn't need courage. And as she found from talking to all kinds of leaders, real acts of courage require one to move through fear. All courage requires vulnerability, she says. All risk, putting ourselves out there, making friends, making amends with others, standing up for what's right. These require us to be vulnerable, and that is scary because we could get hurt. We know that the Master is good, that we have been given life. Jesus, though, calls us to be fruitful, to be daring, to take risks. And this doesn't require changing our whole lives or doing something really, really intense, but often it is that small step into vulnerability that is, in fact, the daring step that we need to take, to listen to God's call to us to give of ourselves, to invest, as Jackie said earlier, deeply in a cause that is calling to us, to wrestle with our discomfort at difference and not understanding. All of these things require courage and vulnerability, but like the servants in this parable, there is celebration on the other side. Again, I don't know about the servant in the parable who opted out, but I do know that everything in my life that has been really scary, that required courage and vulnerability, has always been worth it. And that opting out of risk brings its own kind of outer darkness. There is joy to be had in living boldly and faithfully as we answer God's call. And so, friends, as we continue our journey as a Matthew 25 church, how can we be good stewards of the gifts of God as we await Christ's return? Not just focusing on money, making more money, but living boldly and faithfully as we work to eradicate systemic poverty, dismantling structural racism, and building congregational vitality. How will we continue to boldly address needs in God's name while extending Christ's love in relationships? What is the boldness God is calling you to? Perhaps it will feel something like this.
I'll be fine.
Have fun.
I'll do it. Well, here goes something, I guess. Well, okay, you can do this. I'm gonna jump.
You got it.
Whoa, my ski's slipping off.
Just remember, never snowplow, okay?
No snow plows.
Keep it straight and you'll be fine. Do
Okay.
the same thing you do on the 20.
Straight. Do you go faster on the in run?
Little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much?
Same steepness, it's just longer.
Well, just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all.
Yep. Have
It's a
fun.
bigger 20.
Go ahead. You got this.
I got it.
It's fine. You'll be fine.
Okay. Here
The longer you wait, you'll be more scared.
I go. Just the suspense at the top at the first time freaks you out. That's the only thing. It's so fun. Huh? 60 seems like nothing now. Whoa!
May we all have that kind of courage, even when we have to talk ourselves into it, and breathe deeply. God is with us, calling us to great adventure and great joy.